In the last session, we have understood how to define a variable and some of the important terminology that we need to know in C# before we get started with the C# language with multiple demos. Now, in this session, let us understand about what is a class, what are static and non-static members, and what are constructors and different types of constructors which are supported by C#. So let us understand what is a class. In simple terms, a class is used to define an user-defined reference type, data type members, and the syntax in order to define the class will be class name, and within the braces we need to define the members of the class. Now, one important point we need to remember is that the members of the class is of two types. First is static members. These members are binded with the class definitions and they can be accessed using the class name. And we need to remember that the static members will be loaded whenever the class definition is loaded on the memory. Second is non-static members. These members are binded with the objects defined for the class and they can be accessed using the object name. Next, we need to understand what is an object. In simple terms, we can say that instance of a class is said to be an object. Now, let us understand some of the important points we need to remember about the objects. Objects are always isolated. That is, the values assigned for the members of one object will not be reflected for the members of other objects. Objects occupy physical memory. In order to define an object, the syntax will be class name, object name equal to new class name of argument info, where new class name of argument info is a method for invoking the constructor of the class. Later in this session, I will discuss in detail what is a constructor and its usage. For now, just remember the syntax. Now, the concept of class and members we shall understand in two steps. In first step, we shall understand the syntax to define the members and to access them. And in the second step, we shall understand when to define a member as a static member and when to define a member as a non-static member. We have already discussed about the syntax for defining the class, variables and an object. Now, let us try to understand with a simple demo. So let me open the visualstudio.net and let me add a new class file and provide the name for the class as members demo. As usual, let me remove the boilerplate code and let me type in the commands demo on class, members and objects. Now, let me import the system namespace. So let me type in using system namespace CS intro and then let me define the class members demo and also an entry point, that is our main method. Now, in order to understand the members of the class and how to work with objects, let me define one more class, for example test. So let me type in class test and within that let me define two members. One is non-static and the other one is static. So let me type in public int ns. By default, if we define any member within the class, then it will be considered as a non-static member. Next, let me define a static member. So let me type in public static int s. Since we have used a keyword static, this member will be considered as a static member. And if any member is defined without the keyword static, then it is considered as a non-static member, like the member ns. Now, let us try to access the members of the class. So within the main method, let us access the static variable s. And we know that in order to access the static members, we need to use the class name and the member name. So we need to type in test.s equal to 100. And now let us try to access the non-static members. And we know that in order to access a non-static members, we need to take the support of an object. So let me define an object for the class test. So let me type in test t1 equal to new test. And to access the non-static member, we need to type in t1.ns equal to, let me assign some value, for example 1000. In order to understand the object's behavior, let me define one more instance for the class test. So let me type in test t2 equal to new test. And let us set the value for the non-static member also. So let me type in t2.ns equal to 2000. Now let us display all the values. So let me type in console.writeLine of placeholder of 0, 1 and 2. And let me specify the variables also, test.s, t1.ns and t2.ns. Now if we execute the code, what will be the result? If you have guessed it 100, 1000 and 2000, then you are correct. We will not be getting 100, 2000, 2000 because T1 and T2 are two different objects or instance defined for the class test. And we need to always remember that the memory allocated for each object will be different. Once we have understood the first point, that is the syntax to define the class members and objects, now let us understand when to define the member as a static member or non-static member for a class. To do that, let us understand a simple scenario. Assume that I wanted to maintain the details of all my students. Then I would be defining some class, for example, Shaker students, where the student details I want to maintain will be roll number, student name, course, fees and total students. We need to remember one important point. Selection of static and non-static members will be purely based on the requirement. That is, if the information has to be shared among all the objects, then the member should be defined as a static member. And if the information or data has to be specific for an individual object, then that member should be defined as a non-static member. So if you observe the above scenario, the above class is defined to maintain the details of all my students. I provide trainings on various technologies. I provide training on .NET, MVC, Angular, React, mobile technologies such as Xamarin, cloud technologies such as Azure also. In this case, if you observe, every student will have a specific roll number which will be unique, and even each student is different, right? So the student name will also be specific. And since I provide trainings on multiple technology, the course joined by that student will be specific. And the fees for a particular course will also be specific. But the total number of students I provided training will remain same for all my students. So the roll number, student name, course and fees will be non-static members, and the total students members will be static. Now let us understand with one more scenario. Let us say that I wanted to maintain the details of a single batch. For example, let us assume that I wanted to maintain the details about our current batch. So I would define a class, for example, Shaker. Since this batch is my 399 batch, I would like to specify 399 batch students. And say that I wanted to maintain the same details for each student, that is roll number, student name, course, fees and total students. Now, as I have already mentioned that based on the requirement, the selection of static and non-static changes. In this scenario, the roll number will be specific for each student. And we know that every student is an individual. So the name of the student will also be specific for each student. But all the students are attending the same batch. So the course name remains the same for all the students. The course fees will also remain same for all the students. Since I don't charge huge fees, so I don't provide a variable fees for each student by providing discounts, etc. And finally, the total students for the batch will also remain same for the students, right? So the members roll number and student name should be defined as non-static members, and the data which remains common for all the students, that is course fees and total students, should be defined as a static members. Now let us write down the observation what we have observed based on the above scenarios. Whenever the variable information is specific for an entity, that is an object, then that variable or member should be defined as a non-static member. Whenever the variable information is shared across all the members, then that member should be defined as a static member. Now, let us try to understand this concept with a simple demo. Hi friends, hope you are enjoying my videos. If you like my video, please subscribe my channel and click on the bell icon to get the notifications of all my latest videos. Friends, many students are asking me where can we find your courses and how to get my courses for the best price. Friends, if you are already a Pluralsight subscriber and wanted to upgrade your skills towards Java stacks such as JDBC, Servlets, JSP, and Spring MVC with Hibernate through my courses, please check out the links present at the description on this video. Many students are requesting me to provide trainings on various technologies, which I couldn't able to fulfill all these days. Now, here is the good news. You can learn from me at the most affordable price, $5 to $10 for each course, which means now you can upgrade your skills to the latest technologies at the price lesser than watching a movie. You can find my courses at Udemy and also in our website technoacademy.net. The best price of my course at Udemy you can find using the link provided at the description of this video. And also you can find the price I'm offering at my website technoacademy.net. Wherever the price you feel lesser, subscribe my course from that website. Happy programming, yours Shaker. So let me add a new class file and let me provide the name for the class as static and non-static demo. Now let me add the comment demo to understand the usage of static and non-static members of the class. And let me remove the unwanted using statements and let me cut the static and non-static usage for the class name and add that as a sub namespace so that we can avoid the class name ambiguity in future. Now let me define a class with the name department. And I wanted to define the members as department number, department name, location, and the total departments. In this, department number, department name, and location will remain specific for each individual department, and the total departments remain common for all. So let me type in public int department number, public string department name, comma location. Public static int total departments. Now let me add an entry point within the class demo and then let me define an object for the class department. So let me type in department d1 equal to new department and then let me set the values for the department. So let me type in d1 dot department number equal to 10, d1 dot department name equal to sales, d1 dot location equal to Hyderabad. And since we have provided the details for one department, let me add that details. So let me type in department dot total departments plus equal to 1. Now let me define one more department. So let me type in department d2 equal to new department. Just to provide the viewing comfort, let me place the total department statement to the top. Okay, now let us continue again. Now let me paste the code because I am adding one more new department. and then let us provide the details for the other department. So d2.department number equal to 20, d2.department name equal to training, d2.location equal to Chennai. Now let us try to display the details. So let me type in console.writeLine of total departments colon placeholder of 0 comma department.total departments. And then let us try to display the details of each department. So let me type in console.writeLine of d1 details. I haven't formatted the statement. If you want, you can format to display the result in an efficient way. Once again, let me type in console.writeLine of d2 details. Now let us set the startup object with our class name and let me execute the program. We can observe the total departments are 2, and we can also observe each department is showing its own values, as we know that the objects are isolated and they store the values in different memory locations. Hope you have got a fair idea on how to define a class and how to define the static and non-static members and how to access the members. Once we are clear with the above concept, the next feature we need to understand is the concept called as constructors. So what are constructors? In simple terms to understand, a constructor is used to initialize the members of the class. And remember that C# supports two types of constructors. Static constructors. It is used to initialize the static members of the class. And the syntax will be static class name. And we need to open the braces. Within that, we need to define the members. Now, let us understand some of the important points to remember. A class can have maximum of only one static constructor. Static constructors can't accept any arguments. And remember that static constructors will be invoked only once whenever the class definition is loaded on the memory. And the second type of constructor is non-static constructor. And it is used to initialize the non-static members and static members of the class. The syntax to define a non-static constructor will be public class name of argument info, and within the braces the statements to be executed. Now let us understand some important points to remember about non-static constructors. A class can have any number of non-static constructors. If a class consists of more than one constructor, then it is said to be class is overloaded with constructors, or it is also said to be constructor overloading. Non-static constructors can accept arguments, and if a constructor accepts an argument, then it is said to be parameterized constructor. And if a constructor is defined without any arguments, then it is said to be zero argument constructor. Next, we need to remember that a non-static constructor will be invoked every time a new object is defined for the class. Finally, we need to remember that if a class is defined without any constructor, then CLR will implicitly provide a constructor to initialize the members of the class with their relevant default values. The constructor which has been defined implicitly by the CLR is called as default constructor. And remember that some people misunderstand the zero argument constructor as default constructor. We need to remember that as a programmer, we can never create the default constructor explicitly. We need to remember that if a class is defined with any constructor, then we will never get a default constructor. Now, let us update the previous program, what we have written without using the constructors concept. So let me add a new file and let me provide the name as constructor demo. And then let me write the comments as demo on constructors. And then let me remove all the unwanted namespace reference. And then let me remove the constructors from the class and add that as a subnames for our program so that we can avoid the class name ambiguity. as we have already written a class with the name demo. Now, let me define the class department. So let me type in class department, public int department number, public string department name, comma, location, public static int total departments. In the last program, this was our class department definition. Now let us add the constructor for this class. So let me type in static department, and this will be our static constructor. And we know that static constructors are used to initialize the static members. So let me type in total departments equal to 0. If you don't set the value also, the default value for the integer is 0 only. Next, let me define the non-static constructor. So let me type in public department of int department number, comma, string department name, comma, string location. The above one is our static constructor, and this one will be our non-static constructor. It is always a good practice that whenever we refer the member of the class within a constructor or within the method, which I will discuss in the next session, to refer using this keyword, so that it will be easy for us to identify the members of the class and the arguments of the constructors or methods. So let me type in this dot department number equal to DNO, this dot dname equal to dname, this dot location equal to LOC. And we know that a non-static constructor can be used to initialize both the non-static and also static members. So let me set the value for the total departments also. So let me type in total departments plus equal to 1. Now within the class demo, let me add an entry point, and now let us define the object for our department class. So let me type in department d1 equal to new department of 10, sales, Hyderabad. And let me define one more instance for the department class. So let me type in department d2 equal to new department of 20, training, Chennai. Now let us display the values of the departments. Since the result what I wanted to display remains the same from previous program, instead of writing the code, let me copy the code from the previous program and let me paste that code. Great. Now let us set the startup object as constructor demo and let us execute the program, and we got the result. I hope you are clear with the concepts of what is a class, what are static and non-static members, and when to define a member as a static member and when to define a member as a non-static member. And also I hope you are clear with the usage of constructors and the types of constructors such as static and non-static constructors. In the next session, we shall understand what are object initializers, and let us provide a brief introduction to object-oriented programming. See you in the next session.